There are so many incredible Spider-Man figures on the market. And no matter which is your favorite, one thing is certain. Your favorite Spider-Man figure deserves a diorama. So today I'm going to show you how to make one from start to finish. In 2022, I had the opportunity to make what ended up being one of my favorite diorama commissions of all time. A two-story building that converted to an alleyway for my friend and fellow YouTuber, Carbon Scoring. Here's how I did it. So in case you guys don't know, Carbon Scoring, who I'm making this diorama for, is something of a Marvel Comics historian. And on his YouTube channel, he focuses specifically on the comic panel history of characters like Spider-Man and how those connect to the history of the action figures that we've gotten from Hasbro, Toy Biz, and anybody else that's made those figures. He specifically loves Spider-Man, so what I am going to do is take a look at the inspirational structures from different forms of Spider-Man media. So the movies, some comics, so I've got a couple of collections that have different issues in them that I will be using to inspire the design of this diorama build. Trey from Carbon Scoring is a huge Steve Ditko fan, and unfortunately none of the books that I have Steve Ditko's artwork in them. However, he has an appreciation for all of the different Spider-Man artists that have worked on these books over the years. So one of my favorites is John Romita Sr. His work is in here. We're going to be looking at some of that and some other things. So let's take a look at it. So just opening this up, starting out, you know, there's so many different things in these old Spider-Man comics. Now, I am not going to replicate the old color style for the buildings. This is a little bit too stylized for me. I want to blend this to be something of a comic and movie mixture in the design of my diorama. So I'm really more so looking at the structure of the buildings, how maybe the windows are indented, how the outside of the buildings are enclosed with these cinder block sort of scenarios and things like that. So I'm not really looking for color here. I'm more so looking for structure. So there's all kinds of cool things in here when you go through the pages, and I have a couple things marked. Some of the things that interest me are the brickwork. So we're going to be doing bricks on this build, and as you guys can kind of see here, there's a lot of really good reference material on the bricks and how they play into the look of the building. And you can see similar things here, right? So really, this is what we're looking at to try to get some inspiration for how the outside of this building should look. Before we get started, here is what I'm looking to build. I'm looking to build a diorama that has several different layouts. I didn't record myself carving out the concrete slabs in the base, but I did get myself texturing the piece, which you can see here, using a ball of tinfoil to get the concrete look that I'm looking for. Whenever I do this, I like to vary my pressure along the diorama base so that I can kind of show some different imperfections in the concrete or maybe some impact craters, things like that. I think it adds to the piece. And so here what I'm doing is just going across the piece and finding those spots that I want to call out with some more pressure. And with the help of my 3D printer, I'm multitasking, printing some windows. So I am actually going to use these pieces, which just happen to be the perfect size for this. These were pieces that I created a while back as part of something that I thought I was going to get to but never did, a non-commissioned piece. But I really think they'll look good on both sides of this diorama. So all I have to do is create pieces that'll come all the way across, and then this is going to be the outline of the roof, and then we'll build it from there. The pieces that I'm going to be using for this, they have these little seams in them, and I want this to look like one piece of concrete, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with some of this lightweight wall spackle. This process is as simple as just taking some of the wall spackle and covering the cracks with whatever straight edge you have. I happen to be using an old gift card just because that's the easiest thing that I have lying around, but you could use other tools and accomplish this. I'm using 2 foot by 2 foot foam sheets from Home Depot for this project, and I'm about to move on to the walls, so I'm just checking that it's not too warped for me to use in the project, and I think we're good to go. Time to measure out the distance of how wide the walls are going to be based on how wide the trim pieces on the top are. So instead of just measuring it, the ruler, I've got the piece, so I measure against the piece. Pro tip, always use a fresh blade when you're going to make cuts in this foam. And I'm going to use that fresh blade with a drywall square that I have, which is the biggest T-square that will cover this 2-foot area. What you'll notice is that I'm going to do several passes with the knife to make sure I get the smoothest cut possible without any ridges or fraying. To make my life easier, I'm going to use the piece that I just cut and measure against the new piece that I need to cut, because I need 2 that are the same exact size. And so I'll just take my Sharpie and mark those spots. Just to be extra careful that I didn't measure against a side that wasn't square, I'm going to go ahead and just measure with the drywall T-square and make sure both of those spots I just marked are equal distance apart from the edge. Now that I know we're good to go on those measurements, I'm going to get my knife out and do the same process you guys saw before. Multiple passes to get the smoothest possible cut. I'm also trying to keep my knife at 90 degrees so that I get up a 90-degree seam, or close to a 90-degree seam. Let's do a little stack test. Take the 3 pieces we cut and make sure they're the same length and width. So just a little bit of a dry fit on this, and I wanted to just note to you guys, so I'm going to need to trim this wall, because I want this to be the edge of the building, not this. So we need to make it so that this fits inside these 2. And I also need to trim these down because this is taller than I want them to be. Still 24 inches tall, and I want this to be between 23 inches. So we're going to trim that up next. Wanted to point something out real quick. On these 2x2 XPS foam sheets that I bought, there is always this rough side that you can hear it as I'm going across. Has sort of a rough finish to it. I don't want that on here. And there's also a little bit of damage up here. So what I'm gonna do to make sure that this piece fits inside those 2 is I'm gonna cut 1 inch off this side and most likely 1 inch off that side, or 2 inches off of just the one side. But I'm gonna use the Proxxon this time because I really need to make sure that I have an exact 90-degree angle so that when we go to magnetize this, I don't have any problems. Pro tip, always use a fume mask when you're using a Proxxon hot wire cutter. Just to be extra safe, I always run a fan as well with a window or door open to blow any fumes out with my mask, so protecting myself as best as I possibly can. Here I'm just lining up my cut with my shifting lands jig to make sure that I'm going to get a clean cut. If you're not familiar with this machine, it's called a Proxxon hot wire foam cutting table. It allows you to make really precise cuts. You can change the angles, or you can do a straight cut like what I'm doing here, and it just makes things as perfect as you can possibly get them. I've got a couple of enhancements on my Proxxon. So I mentioned I'm using a shifting lands jig. That's the piece that I'm holding with my left hand that you can see that's stabilizing. This is a much more versatile and reliable tool than the jig that comes with the machine. I'm also using a foot pedal so that I control the heat better during my cutting process. These are actually going to be some pretty important pieces of scrap foam for us. I'm going to hang on to these and you guys will see how I use them later on in the build. Now you guys can see what I mean, that the edging of this is going to line up with where we carved the sidewalk blocks. So this runs this way, this runs that way. Now the next thing I'm going to do is adjust the height. So I'm going to use the Proxxon to cut this down to about 22 inches all the way across. Then I'm going to make sure that all of the edges are square before we magnetize it. I want these walls to be 20 inches high, so I'm going to mark that here using the T-square again on 2 spots so that I'm ensuring that I have a straight and reliable line. This piece has 3 walls, so we have 3 walls to cut. The next thing we're going to do is magnetize the walls to each other, and we're going to use a hot glue gun on the low temperature setting, so there's high and low. We're going to use low to not melt the foam. We're going to use this copper tube. I can't remember the exact size of this, but it lines up with the exact size of the magnets we're using. We're using some heavy-duty ceramic magnets that I get on Amazon. These things are great. I always use them, and we'll also use the X-Acto knife. I'm going to have, this is the front wall, this is the side wall here. I'm going to magnetize them together first, and then we'll get the third wall on there after these two together. And now I'm going to use the copper tubing. I'm going to puncture where I want the magnets to go. When I do this, I just move the tube back and forth to kind of create a cut in the foam. And you don't have to go down too deep because we're only going to go a little bit into the foam to magnetize the diorama. Now what I'm going to do is go the width of a magnet. So sometimes you can, if you want to, you can indent the side a little bit so you can see the slight indentation that I just made right here. Just go ahead and cut with the X-Acto knife. Cut that out. Then you get, this is the foam, we're going to put the magnet into where the foam was, right there, like that. So now our hot glue gun is heated up, and I'm going to place the magnets in here. You'll see that this side of the magnet has a dot and this side doesn't. So with these magnets, the side that has the dot attracts to the side that does not. So that's what you want to keep in mind. So for these pieces, I'm going to have the dot facing up, and then on the opposite side, when we connect the piece, we'll have no dot that connects to these. So with this, you can do sort of like a little bit of a cross and insert your magnet, push it down. If there's excess, it's not super hot because it's low temp, so you can kind of just wipe it away. Sometimes it'll hurt a little bit, but that right there did not. Same thing here. Push it down. Let those set in place, and then we can test them out. Now, if we try to do the dot to the dot, you'll see it doesn't work. But if you do it the correct way, it works great. For this next part, you want to make sure you're working on a nice level surface. My workbench is pretty level, so I'm confident with it. And we are going to simply line these up so that the walls are flush to each other. And then I'm going to indent into the foam in both magnet spots, which you guys can see here and here. Now we just need to do the same process that we used in the previous step with and so for this piece, this is going to be the outside facing part. This is going to be the inside of the diorama that we don't see, so I'm going to cut my indents on the top here. But I want to make sure that I don't go all the way through to the other side, because I don't want the X-Acto knife to poke through and be visible. I want to make sure that I cut level, which I didn't here, so I'm going to go back in and clean it up. And just before I glue them in permanently, just to test that I actually got it in the right spot, you can actually insert the magnets into the holes we just created and see if it looks the way you want. It's pretty much flush right here, which is what we're going for. So I'm going to go and I'm going to add these in. For this part, it's really just getting a little hot glue in here. Make sure that the part that does not have the dot on it is facing outward, so it'll attract to the other wall, and then doing the same thing here. And sometimes if the glue spills over, I kind of just do a sweeping motion to clean it up. And then we can just test it out. You guys can see how strong those magnets are when they're lined up properly. They stick right together like that. Now, if you're wondering what we're going to do about this right here, we're going to wall spackle that, and you won't even be able to see it. Same thing with this, because we don't want that to be visible. Off camera, I put this all together, and here's how it's looking so far. I put a Marvel Legends Captain America in there just so you guys could see the size of it. I want these to be the same thickness, so I marked it with a red Sharpie again. And then it's back to the Proxxon to get the thickness right for this piece. And I'm going to need 2 of them, so I'll cut the second one as well. Test fit, moment of truth, and we're good. Okay, so now that I have the diorama magnetized, or at least the walls magnetized to each other, and it's standing upright, I want to show you guys what I'm going to do on the inside. So we're going to create a roof that is going to be flush with all of the top of the pink areas that you're seeing. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this. I'm going to measure this out, a spot for the foam to sit on top of. So I'll put one here and maybe one here. And then we can actually place the foam on top and it'll sit right in there. So that's the next step. For all three of these pieces, I'm going to measure 1 inch down from the top wall because this is 1 inch foam and the roof piece is going to be that thick. I don't often actually draw permanent marker lines to mark things in my dioramas, but in this case I'm going to, since it's the inside of the diorama and it's going to be covered by a glued over piece. These lines will guide me as I glue. Now I just mark and cut these support beams. Time to glue these in place. As you can see, I already have the 2 longer beams in place, and I'm actually using the scraps from those cuts that I made earlier to do the more narrow wall in the middle, which is what I'm doing right here. Gluing those 2 pieces in place, and these are all going to serve as the spot that the roof will sit on top of securely. The roof area that we just created is going to be 16 inches by 17 inches, so I'm going in and just marking with the knife where those spots are and making those cuts, again using multiple passes to get through the foam. Another pro tip, you always want to make sure the anchored edges are always straight or 90 degrees. As you can see, Spider-Man is up on top of here. The way that we did this, you'll actually be able to get several figures up there securely, even some of the bigger ones. I finished printing all of my 3D printed windows, so now I'm just trying to map out where they'll appear on the walls. So one of the walls I want to be like an all window wall. So we've got my warehouse windows and then my 2 pane windows. So 3 of the warehouse and 4 of the 2 pane. The way I normally do the warehouse windows is about 3 inches from the bottom. If I'm doing multiple stories, Riku on Instagram told me he does 5 or 5.5 inches between stories for 1/12 scale. So I like that measurement and I'm going to use that here. I start out by outlining where I want my cuts to appear for my windows so that I know where to indent the cuts. Then I further define the outline of the window with an X-Acto blade. This will serve as a guide as I cut through the foam. Next, I take my 2 pane windows and I indent them in the foam where I want the cuts to occur. Those impression marks are what I use to cut against with my T-square to ensure that I'm going to get an exact cut that I need to fit these windows into. Now that the windows are cut, it's time to move on to our brickwork. If you're a fellow diorama artist, you know how tedious this process can be, but even though it can take a long time, it's important to put love and care into this and not rush through it, because this is really what's going to define the detail of our sculpt. What you're seeing me do is just mark out where our horizontal brick lines are going to occur. I'm going to use those markings to guide me to make sure that I am cutting straight lines that are perpendicular with the edge of the diorama. And these guidelines are really what's going to help me sell this as believable brickwork. I really recommend using a T-square here. When I first started out, I would use a ruler and it was really difficult to make sure that my lines were actually perpendicular and straight that way. It's also important to check that the side of the diorama you're cutting against is a 90-degree angle. Otherwise, these cuts are not going to come out the way that you want them to. Okay, so now we're at a point where you can see where all the windows are going to be, and we have all of the horizontal lines going all the way up the piece for the brick. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually create the staggered brick lines that you guys will see next, the vertical lines. The first step is marking where you want your bricks to occur, and for 1/12 scale, I do 1 inch apart for this step. Once those lines are marked, I work my way up the diorama, skipping a row every time to get the staggered brick effect. Next, I make a mark every 1/2 inch. Then I use the T-square to work my way up the dio and define those marks. After all the cuts are made, I define the lines with a clay sculpting tool so that I can do mortar work after I've painted this piece. I start with the vertical lines and then I go with the horizontal, allowing me to erase any errors that I may have made when I made the vertical lines. Okay, so with the help of my clay sculpting tool, which I got at Dollar General, we now have fully indented bricks and it's starting to look like a building. So the next step is going to be to cut out the windows, and then I'm going to texture the bricks and indent them and do some other cool things. Now that the bricks are fully defined, I've got to cut out my windows. So I start by tracing the spots that I already had outlined with an X-Acto blade. Then I take my box cutter and I do several more passes per window. Once I feel like I've almost broken through, I do a sawing motion to actually cut these windows out, and I go through to the other side almost completely in this process. So you guys can see the first 2 windows that I cut, I did a pretty good job on making sure that it was a 90-degree cut and also that I was using a fresh blade. There is a little bit of fraying on the inside of this that I don't like. So to do the other windows, I'm going to get a new knife. Here's a closer look at what I do to get these windows out. As you'll notice, I do a couple of passes without the sawing motion, and then I go into the sawing motion to make sure I've got a full cut all the way through. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be good. And this is a case of that because I got really lucky on where I placed these windows because it lines up almost exactly with this piece that we installed to rest the roof on. I did not plan it out this way, but I lucked out and we're going to be okay. So here it is, the piece with all the windows cut out. Now before I actually go in and test fit the windows, we're going to go in between each one of these columns and we're going to put all the brickwork, we're going to have the brickwork continue through on these bottom windows because these are, we're going to have sitting inside. For these ones, they're going to be on top like this, so you won't see the part that we just cut. This is the same process that we did before when we were carving the bricks on the front of the building, except now we're just doing it in the framing of the window to make it look like that brickwork continues all the way through. And now it's time to texture the foam. So I'm going to use a couple of different tools. I'm going to use a tin foil, rolled up tin foil ball right there. I'm going to use a wire brush, metal wire brush that you can get at the dollar store. And I'm also going to use a screwdriver, just a flathead screwdriver. And I'll show you guys how I do that. So we're going to start out with the ball of tin foil and just want to get some good texture on the foam all the way through. And when you're doing these skinnier parts here, these are the most fragile parts of the diorama. So you just want to be careful as you're going over those spots that you're not putting too much pressure because you could break them if you do too much pressure. For this part of the process, you want to try to get full coverage and you want to get varying pressures as you go throughout because not all bricks would be uniform, so they're not all going to have the same level of impact. And don't forget to get some texture on the insides of these windows that we just did because we're going to want at least this part of the bricks to be showing. Now that the building is covered with the tinfoil texturing, I'm just going to take I'm not going to do a lot with the wire brush, but some bricks will have some like little porous kind of texture on them, so I'm going to just do that for a little bit of this. So far it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and pick some bricks randomly. I'm going to use the flathead screwdriver that I had brought out, and I'm just going to push down certain bricks. And sometimes I push the whole brick down like I am right here, and sometimes I'll only pick a portion. So maybe if this brick is pushed all the way down, maybe this one just has a partial right there like that. And I'm just going to go through the piece and try to find several that I want to do that effect with, which is going to help enhance the realism of the piece, and when we go to paint it, it's really going to make it look cool. And just in case you couldn't see what I was doing in the previous shot, here's a zoomed in shot where I am recessing some of these bricks. Okay, so off camera I went ahead and I added in all the 3D printed windows. I just did a dry fit, they're not glued in, just so we could get a sense of how this is going to look. And I love the way this texture is coming out. I love the recessed bricks that we have. I love the texture that we achieved from using that tin foil and that wire brush, and I think once we get some paint on this, it's really gonna pop. All of the work that we've done so far on this piece has been on one of the diorama walls, and we still have 2 more to go. So here what I'm gonna do is mark where I want double doors to be in the middle of the diorama. The typical door is 7 feet tall by 3 feet wide. This is a 1/12 scale diorama, so 1 foot in real life is 1 inch in the diorama. I want to do double doors here, so it's going to be 6 inches wide by 7 inches tall. After the door is defined, I go ahead and define where the door frame is going to be. To spare you all, I did the brickwork off camera. If only it was that easy. Then I went ahead and cut out the door that we had defined. Time to add some decorative pieces to the brickwork, so I'm using my Proxxon to cut some trim pieces. The trim pieces that I'm creating are actually meant to be a layer of brick on top of the brick that we just made. So I'm just marking these out 1 inch at a time. After that, we just add a little bit of texture and we're good to go. I just take that trim piece and I hot glue it into place using the brick line to guide me. And I think I want to add the same thing to the top portion of this, so I apply that as well. After that, I added these vertical brick lines every 4 brick spaces to the diorama. And I wanted to continue the design around the building, so that's what you see me doing here. That includes the little vertical pieces that we just looked at. Off camera, I also cut these little window sills that I wanted to put in place. I decided to add these only to the 2 pane windows all the way around the building. So real quick guys, I did off camera finish the back wall, and I didn't do anything new on here, so you guys have seen all the techniques that I've already done for the window cutouts and for this trim work and of course the brickwork. So nothing new there, and that's going to be the last portion of our exterior wall. One other thing I did off camera is create these, the pieces that are going to connect the 2 front facing and back facing decorative roof pieces are going to be these brick pieces. So I've got them, they're 360, well they're not exactly 360, but I didn't do the bottom part, but that is going to be glued to the diorama, so I'll show you guys how that looks on there. For this part, I'm only gonna hot glue this one piece to this one side because this entire wall that I'm gluing this to is now gonna be painted the same color and the mortar will be done all at the same time. So it makes sense on this side, but it doesn't make sense on the other side where we have the hollow piece without the wall. Here are the base colors we're gonna start off with. First, I apply the Cafe a Lot color to the decorative roof pieces that we're gonna have at the top of the diorama. I really want more of a brownstone color on these bricks, so I chose a nutmeg brown by Apple Barrel to start off with a base coat. I think that you guys will see this allows us to achieve that color of brick a little bit better than using black or gray or something else as the base coat. My goal here is to get really good coverage, and that means inside these window areas as well. As I let that dry, it's time to tackle the base of this diorama with a heather gray, one of my favorite colors to base coat when I'm creating concrete. While I'm at it, I'm also going to use heather gray on the rooftop concrete piece that we created. Next up, we'll base coat the door with an Anita's Hunter Green. You can go so many different color directions with a door like this for an alleyway, but I really love this color. Okay, so now we've got the diorama primed with all the base colors that we want to work off of. And we're going to start adding in secondary colors on the brickwork first and then the concrete pieces. But before we do that, let me show you the inspiration for the coloring of this diorama. In this scene, you see 2 different color bricks. I really want something in between these colors. And that means I'm going to have to mix some paint. So first we'll start with nutmeg brown, the color we use to prime the bricks. After that, we're going to add in some earth brown, also by Anita's. To finish things out, I'm also going to add in some orange. After a quick stir, we can see what color we're going to have. After my base coat dried, I took the new color that we mixed and I covered all of the brick pieces for this diorama. If you look at the brick buildings in old Spider-Man comics, you'll notice an orange and yellow color tone to them. While that's not the final color I want, it's a great undertone for us to use as part of this brick building. I didn't get a chance to get myself mixing this next paint color, but all it is this Cafe a Lot with the previous coat color. This next part requires a smaller brush, some precision, and a whole lot of patience. What I'm doing here is just picking out certain bricks that I want to be the secondary color and painting them in, and I'm going to do that on all 3 of the walls that have this brick color on them. I want a little bit more color variation, so we're going to do a 3rd brick tone. To achieve the 3rd color, I'm going to add in a little bit more of the earth brown and then some vino color by Anita's. That's going to give me just a hint of some realistic red on these bricks. Now it's back to this foam canvas that is my diorama. I'm painting this new color as single bricks as we did in the previous step, and I'm going to do this on all 3 of the brick walls that we created as part of this piece. Next step is to black wash the brick. This is just black paint and water mixed together. Now I'm going to cover this entirely with the black wash, and as you guys will notice, this is a very thin wash, which is what I want because I'm looking for subtlety here. My thoughts on washes are that I would rather have to add more of them than add too much and not be able to do anything about it and have it ruin my piece. Sort of like salting or seasoning a food that you're cooking. After that first coat of the black wash, I think you can start to see some of the realism coming through, which is what we want. We have kind of blended the colors a little bit, and there are some spots like these recessed bricks that are more prominent now because of the black wash. So I'm going to do a little bit of a second coat of the black wash, not everywhere, in certain spots where I think it would make more sense to have like a darker, more built up dirt area. For this coat of black wash, the way I try to think is, if this building was in the rain or in the elements for years at a time, how would it weather over time? And it kind of just goes with gravity from top to bottom. So that's what I'm trying to achieve with the way that I'm putting this black wash on in this step. And just like our previous paint steps, I'm doing this to all of the brick pieces that we have in the diorama, not just the first one that you saw. And I'm really trying to make sure there's some continuity. After the black wash completely dries, I add a brown wash, which unfortunately I did not mix on camera for you guys, but essentially it's some brown and then some lighter tan colors mixed with water, which you guys can see. It adds a little bit to the dirtiness of this, and it also brings out the color that I want. And I'm applying this throughout the piece on all 3 of the diorama brick walls. Since we applied washes to the bricks, I also want to do a similar thing with black wash on the decorative pieces that we base coated at the beginning. One difference over the brick is here I'm actually wiping the black wash away with a paper towel so to make it even more subtle than what it was on the bricks. I also want to make sure that the doors that we created have some different washes on them, so I'm using a brown wash here and using my paper towel to wipe it away. Again, looking to achieve subtlety on this paint job. So I actually do this from top to bottom, and then I do add some the rest of the way through in different layers to hopefully get some different color variation throughout it. Next is one of the most critical parts of the brick process in diorama building, sealing the piece. And I'm using Miniwax polyurethane, which is a spray sealer that will not eat the foam. I did 2 coats of this and I let it dry for about an hour. Now it's time for the part of the process that's going to really complete the brickwork. We're going to put the mortar, which is going to be lightweight wall spackle, on here. Then we're going to let it set and wipe it all away, and we'll have finished mortar on this piece. All you need here is some kind of straight edge. I'm using an expired gift card and the lightweight wall spackle, and you just apply and scrape it off so that you've got some of it covering, but most of the excess has been taken off. The bottom portion of this is a little trickier because I have the decorative brick pieces as a second layer that I also want mortar to apply to. So I just have to take a little bit extra time to make sure that I am applying it in all of the gaps that the mortar needs to appear in. Also, a little something I learned the hard way, I probably should have done this process in sections, because when I went to do this part of the process, which is applying water to a microfiber cloth and then scrubbing away the excess, I actually saw that it was curing a little bit faster on the top portion than I would have liked. Everything turned out fine in the end, but if I can help you avoid a headache, I'm here for it. Oh, and don't forget to get those door frame bricks. We want those to look good as well. Here's a quick shot of me realizing that this cured a little bit faster than I wanted it to, so I had to apply some more water and some more passes to get this off of the top part. But lesson learned, next time I'm totally going to do this in sections. Okay, so the first 2 walls that we have are done. I still have to do the main wall that has all the windows on it, and I still have to do the trim piece. But I wanted you guys to see that, you know, all the work that we've done so far has led up to this point where you can see a lot of color variation in this, and that's from the different color brick that we painted, but it's also from the way that we just wiped away the mortar. So since we sealed it, it did preserve most of the color, but one of the things I like about doing it this way is I do feel like it blends some of the paint colors together, and of course we also did washes, so there's just a lot of work that went into the result that we have right here, and I just wanted to take a minute and admire it. And I'm going to make sure I don't have any spots that I need to clean up, but we're going to move on to the final wall. For the final wall, we use the exact same process that I just showed you guys, except this time I learned my lesson and I did this whole process in sections. So bottom first, then the top. So now that all the brickwork is done, what I am going to do is I am going to glue on the rest of the pieces that I had, the decorative pieces for the roof. And to make sure I'm doing that in a way that is straight and level and all of that, I'm going to, first I have it on the base, and I have all the magnets in place. I have the roof piece in place, and now I'm gonna hot glue the front piece, the back piece, and then the side piece here. So each one of these I have a specific side that I wanted. So this one is the first, and we're gonna hot glue this in place. Here, the key was to make sure that everything was square and lining up the way that I wanted. So I definitely took my time and made sure that I was adding the two decorative pieces in first, then everything was working off of those. Then all I had to do was glue the last brick piece to the ceiling piece. I normally do black windows in my dials, but I really wanted to try white windows on this piece. I thought it looked good with the brick color. So that's what I'm doing here, just a little spray paint. After we painted these white, these are going to be way too clean to appear on the building, so I want to subdue them a little bit with some sponge brushing. This is really going to help with the cohesive look of the building to make sure that all those washes and things that we did on the brick carry over into the window frames. If this building was in existence for a long time, these would not be clean. They don't have to be extremely dirty, but I want the warehouse windows and the smaller 2-pane windows to each have a similar weathering to them. And after wiping away the excess, I think we have a good result here. These windows are nice and dirty now. We might touch them up a little bit, but they are going to be a lot more believable with the rest of the paint job on the diorama this way than they would have if we just left the white spray paint on them. Now that we're done with the frames, it's time to actually put the window panes in. And what I use are these Dollar Tree chopping mats that are somewhat opaque, and it really works out great for dioramas. And I use clear Gorilla Glue for this because it doesn't smudge. I'll use a Sharpie and some scissors as well to mark my cuts. Because I already have the window frames out, I'm just going to work off of those. So I just make my markings and then simply cut with scissors. Then what I do is just test fit these in each window to make sure the panes are actually going to fit when we glue them in. I have 8 of these 2-pane windows in this diorama, so I need to cut out 8 of these and glue them into place. And we're all set. Time to test fit these in the rest of the windows. If you've never done this before, I highly suggest using this specific clear Gorilla Glue to glue your window frames in. Speaking from experience, I've tried this with a bunch of different glues, and I always get some weird smudging with other types of glues, and it almost never happens with this specific kind of glue. I use an old foam scrap to apply the glue evenly to the window frames, and then I just pop the cutout acrylic into place. After those windows dry, I need to glue them into the diorama so they're permanent, and I use this Hot Wire Foam Factory Styro Glue to make that happen. Here I use the same process. I use a foam scrap to apply the glue evenly to where I want the windows to stick to on the brick structure, which is half of the bricks that are in the framing of the windows. Then I take my windows, which have the panes dried in them, and I just pop them into place, trying to be careful not to get so much glue on my fingers. And I do the same exact thing for the other 2 windows on this wall, just making sure that I place these with care and that they're in the right spot. Now that we installed the windows, it's time to test them out and see how it looks when we put a light inside there. See if the backlit capability works the way we want. So I'm going to use one of these that I got on Amazon, just an LED light that's adjustable. Okay, so before I move on to this part, I want to just explain off camera, I did do one black wash across this entire piece, and then I did also start doing a little bit of dry brushing with some black along the crack lines or the divider lines of the sidewalk. So I'm going to show you guys just real quick how I do that. So we're going to dry brush some black on there. So because we're using black, you want to make sure that there's really almost no black paint on the brush as you're applying it, so that it more so looks like believable dirt or weathering than black paint that is skewed across this piece. In an effort to add even more weathering to this, I used a very, very light, subtle brown wash on top of the dry brushing that we just did with the black, and I tried to apply that throughout the entire piece in varying shapes and sizes throughout the concrete. So I didn't show this on camera, but I want to explain a couple of things like these posters and this sign that you guys see here. So all of these are images that I found on Google Images that I printed out on cardstock just using a regular printer, computer printer. And then I got some cold coffee, put the coffee on each one of these, soaked them in coffee, and baked them for 5 minutes in the oven at 250 degrees, which gave them a little bit more of an aged look. So that's what I did on the posters. The surveillance sign also has some aluminum tape behind it so you can bend it, and you can see there's some little spots where you can kind of bend the sign so it looks like maybe it was metal and someone dinged it. And then it has sewing needles holding it in. All of these signs actually have double-sided tape holding them on, so all of these things can be removed and Trey can put them wherever he wants. The last thing I wanted just to note is that I did add a little 60th anniversary Spider-Man logo because this diorama was made during the year 2022, which was Spider-Man's 60th anniversary. So just as a cool little Easter egg, I put it a little sticker on there. And then the last thing is I did do similar dry brushing on the door that you guys saw me do on the floor piece of this with just black to give it more of a dirty and aged look, and I did the same thing on the employees only sign here. So if you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen that I teased that this diorama has two different layouts. One is the building layout and the other is the alleyway layout. Let's check out what that looks like. This diorama is going to be used by Trey from Carbon Scoring for action figure photography, and some of what he does is recreate comic covers. I also enjoy action figure photography, specifically ACBA, articulated comic book art. So of course I had to test things out. Here we've got a scene where Peter Parker is donning the Spider-Man suit because he sees that Taskmaster and his goons are going to be up to no good in this new alleyway that we've created.